What is up, YouTube? Eric Vasquez here from Teach Me to Design. Have you ever wondered how to take a pencil sketch and turn it into a finished, clean, polished-looking vector art inside of Adobe Illustrator? Well, in today's tutorial, we're going to be doing just that as I walk you through my step-by-step design process from taking this pencil sketch and turning it into a finished, custom piece of typography. So, let's get started. All right, so to get started, we're going to import one of our sketches into Adobe Illustrator, and I did maybe 3 sketches for this, so I'm just going to go ahead and pick one of these to start with. I think I might use let's go with this one. All right, so I'm just going to open this up really quick. I'm going to select it, press Command X to cut it, and then I'll go ahead and press Command N to make a new document that's 10 inches wide by 10 inches tall. Artboard can be set to 1 and the color mode set to RGB. Now, once you've created your new document, go ahead and paste your sketch by pressing Command and V. And then I'm just going to zoom out because this is a huge sketch here. You can see if the file is 10 by 10, this has got to be at least like a 50 by 50 sketch here. So we're going to scale this way down by dragging inwards from any of the 4 corners while holding Shift and Alt Option on the keyboard until this fits nicely here in our 10 by 10 artboard. Now I'll go ahead and rename this layer Sketch. And then I'll go ahead and double click on the layer and choose dim images to, I usually go around 50% just to dial it back a little bit. And then I'm just going to rotate this a little bit too, because I just want to make sure that it's close to straight, something like that. All right, and sometimes I'll even press Command R to get my rulers and just drag out a guide so that I can kind of see roughly, where I'm at here. All right, so something like that, just to kind of give us a nice starting point. Doesn't have to be perfect. Okay, and that looks pretty good. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and lock this layer, lock my sketch layer. And before we do anything else, I will go ahead and save my file. Okay, so there's a few ways that we could do this, but the first thing we need to do is create a new layer, and then press P on the keyboard to grab your pen tool, press D to switch to your default colors, and then choose none for the fill. All right, so you should just have a black stroke color here. And what we're going to do now is just begin to trace the shape. Now, when I say trace the shape, I mean, depending on the complexity of the sketch that you want to vectorize, sometimes it makes more sense to kind of go around the outside of the shape. But in this case, because it's mostly a uniform kind of thickness, what I'm going to do is just create a single path that goes through the middle of the shape here. Okay, so I'm clicking and dragging, holding down with the pen tool here, and then I'm just going to create a single line, something like that, right? Okay, so if I click on my point, I can then use the handles to kind of smooth it out. All right, so I'm going to do the same thing here for the remainder of the word, just by clicking and dragging. And I think what I want to do on the R is maybe add a little bit of a loop to it, so I'm just going to create a few extra points here. Make it loop around like that. Okay, and then we will continue coming down here to the bottom and creating a few more points. All right, so at this point, we're just kind of setting the foundation here, right? So I'm just following the sketch using the reference here. And for the H, because the H is separated, I'm going to do it in 2 parts, okay? So I'm going to create this first part here, and then I'll create the top afterwards. All right, so I'm not worried about being perfect right off the bat here. I'm just trying to get a nice base going. All right, so let's go ahead and create the top. All right, click, drag, and hold to manipulate your handles. All right, and just continue to follow that shape, trying to go through the middle or as close to it as you can. All right, now I'm just going to go ahead and create one extra line here that's going to serve as the top of our H. All right, and if I turn off the sketch layer, you can see really quickly what we have. Just a very basic line here. And if I press Command A, I'm going to open my stroke panel. And if you don't have this, it's found under the window menu right here. And what we're going to do is add a weight of around, I don't know, let's say like 25, just to make it nice and bold, closer to our sketch. And you'll notice once I do that, that all of the corners and the edges are like very sharp, right? So what we need to do is check off this option here for round cap and round corner. And that's just going to make everything feel a little bit more uniform. So now that we've done that, I'll press A on the keyboard to get my direct selection tool. And I can click on here and maybe manipulate some of these points a little bit more. So for example, I want to straighten out the T a little bit, so I'm just going to drag that over. I want to maybe move the top of the H up a little bit more and just kind of smooth out a few of these corners here. Another thing you can do if you zoom in, you'll notice you see these little white circles here. If I click and drag on that, it will smooth out some of these shapes even more. So let's go ahead and do that in a few spots. And then I'll grab the top of the H here. This time I'll press V to grab my regular selection tool because I want to move the whole shape. Then press A again to just grab this bottom point and move it down. All right, and then for the tail, let's go ahead and move this up a little bit. I need the top of this to kind of line up with the top of the H, so I'm just going to press A to grab my direct selection tool, move these points over a little bit, and then I'll use the handles to kind of bring this curve up like that. All right, and then let's go ahead and open up the loop here inside of the R as well. All right, so again, I'll use A to grab my direct selection tool, maybe grab this point here and just move it over to the left a little bit. And then I'm going to use the handles just to kind of open up the space here in the middle. All right, so we get a nice looking loop there. And if you need to, you can also manipulate this top bar here on the T. Okay, maybe bring this point in a little bit and use the handles just to smooth it out some. All right, maybe somewhere about there looks pretty good. Just tweaking that point a little bit more. And we've got a nice start here. So let's go ahead and manipulate a few more of these points. I'll bring the T up a little bit, maybe change the H, and just try to bring that point over a little bit more. Right, something like that. It's looking pretty good so far. All right, now I'll just move the top of the T over to the left, and then go ahead and save your work again before moving on. So now we've got a pretty good base, but there's a problem. Everything feels very much the same, right? It's a little bit too uniform. So what if you want to add a little bit of variation here to the width of some of your lines? Well, we're going to use a very handy tool in Illustrator, which is the width tool. And the shortcut for that is Shift and W. And if I select my width tool, what I can do is click on any of these points. And if I click and drag, you'll see that I can make this end wide, or I can bring it in and make it thinner. So let's go ahead and make this piece a little bit wider here. We'll make the line in the middle a little bit thinner. And then we'll make this piece on the opposite end a little bit wider. Right? You don't have to go crazy with it, but just a little bit of width there will, kind of add some variety. And I'm just going to continue to do this for a few other parts of the shape here. Maybe making the bottom of the R a little bit thinner. Same thing for the U here. We can just kind of eyeball it and see how that looks. Right, maybe I'll make this piece a little bit thicker. Right, and then do the same thing on the H here. You can go a little bit thicker here. Make this bottom line a little bit thinner here. And make the end a little bit thicker. And then let's go ahead and tweak the top here as well. Make the end thick. The kind of in-between pieces can be a little bit thinner. And then I'll add a little thickness here as well. All right, and so that's giving us a little bit of variation, which is helping quite a bit to make the shape appear more organic. And because everything is still an outline, basically, we can still manipulate the handles and move the points around as much as we want to. All right, so I'm just gonna tweak this shape a little bit more here. Right, just to smooth out a few of these lines. And let's use the width tool again, and maybe I'll tweak this a little bit more, make it a little bit thicker like it was before. Something like that. All right, so now we're in pretty good shape. What I want to do at this point is select my entire shape here, and I'm going to copy it. Okay, so let's go ahead and rename this layer Stroke. Lock the layer, turn off the visibility, add a new layer on top and press Command F to paste it. And then once you've pasted this new copy, We will call this merged. And now go to the object menu and choose expand appearance. And that's going to convert everything into a solid shape. Okay. So at this point, what we can do is open up the Pathfinder. And again, if you don't have this available, go to the window menu and choose Pathfinder. And we're going to select this third option from the left here on the second row of the Pathfinder called merge. And you'll notice when I did that, it worked for the most part, except for this one spot here on the H, because for some reason it did not expand the H. So we just need to return to the object menu, choose expand, make sure fill and stroke are clicked, and then choose OK. And now we can select all of this again and choose merge. Okay, so basically what that does is it makes it so that we can change the fill color of this entire shape. Okay, and the only spot where we need to correct this is the little counter here inside of the R where we made that loop. So if this happens to you, it's very easy to fix. Just press A to get your direct selection tool, click in the middle of that shape, and then just delete it. So you now have a solid fill, right? And you can change it to any color you want, which is very nice, right? You can put a background if you want. You can, rotate it, transform it a little bit. Let's see what happens if we go to Object, Transform, and maybe shear this. Okay, because I want to maybe straighten it out a little bit or play around with the angle. So let's go ahead and do a value of around 3 for a horizontal shear, and then click OK. And then I'll select it again and go to Object, Shear. This time maybe choose a vertical shear and put in a value of like -12, or maybe that's a little too extreme. Try like -8, right? Just to give it a little bit of movement there, a nice little diagonal. All right, and we can see what happens if we go to 10. That looks pretty good. Yeah, let's go with -10, click OK, and then I'm just going to change this back to solid black. Now, at this point, we're going to kind of stylize this a bit, right? Let's have some fun with this shape. What I want to do is actually incorporate some of Illustrator's new 3D capabilities into this to take it to the next level. So what I'm going to do is go over here to my 3D options. And again, this can be found under the window menu by going to 3D and materials. And the new 3D features in Illustrator are really cool. So once you open up this panel, let's choose inflate. Now inflate, you're not going to be able to see anything right away because we changed our color to solid black. But if I change it now to maybe like a red or an orange color, you can see what's starting to happen here. We're starting to get a lot more depth out of this. Okay, so if I play around with the depth, you'll see that it's kind of adding like a shadow. I don't really want the shadow, but I do want to crank the volume all the way up and choose inflate both sides. And then let's see what other options we have here. We can play around with the rotation, which looks pretty cool. The overall perspective, which will kind of add even more depth here. So let's maybe put that up to around 90 degrees. And then we can even go to the materials tab and tweak that a little bit. So let's see if I turn the roughness all the way down, what that does. And then maybe if I crank up the metallic a little bit, it's going to make it a little bit more glossy looking, which doesn't look so bad. But now if I increase the roughness, that's going to give me some nice highlights here, which I really dig. All right, so let's go with that. Maybe find a nice happy medium here. So my roughness is set to around 0.28 and the metallic is about 0.5. I don't want to go too high up. Maybe let's try like 0.6. That looks pretty good. Okay, and then what I can do is come over here to the lighting. I can play around with the intensity of the lighting. Right, maybe around 96. You can rotate the light, which will, of course, change where your highlights are appearing. Right, so that's kind of a cool look there. Maybe something like that. And nice to have the rotation set to 180. You can also play around with the height, the softness, and a few other options here as well as the intensity. So I'm going to leave the intensity where it is, around 50. And I don't want any shadows for now. All right, and I think that's looking pretty cool. So I'm just going to go ahead and close a few of these panels for the moment. And what I can do now is play around with these colors even more. So now I can just change the fill color like I normally would. Okay, play around with that a little bit. Like that's kind of a cool, nice look there, like a nice indigo kind of color. Right, something like that. I kind of liked the more saturated look that we had going before, so I'm going to go back to that. Maybe add a little bit of red or magenta to it. Okay, and then what I'll do is add a new layer just below this layer, press M on the keyboard to get my rectangle tool, double click, and let's make sure that it's 10 by 10, so it's the same size as our artboard. And I'm just going to go ahead and place this in here as a background. Now I'll change the color of this to maybe like a nice sort of greenish blue color. Bring a little more green into it. Something like that. A little more blue. Call this layer background. And then we can go ahead and lock it. And then what we can do is add another layer. Okay. Press M once again, double click. But this time, instead of using a fill color, let's go ahead and add a gradient. So I'm going to click on this gradient fill right here, change it to a radial gradient, and then let's go ahead and select the black fill color here and change it to white. All right, and then let's go ahead and reduce the opacity of that side to 0. Okay, and we can move this middle slider here to make that center highlight a little bit wider or more sort of constricted and centered. All right, just by moving the location of that middle slider. So what I'm going to do now is open my transparency tab over here and change the blending mode to overlay. Okay, and then I'll just rename that layer highlight. And if I want to, maybe I'll change the color of the background a little bit just to help that highlight stand out more. All right, so I'm just going to darken that a little bit while keeping some green in there because I like the way that looks. All right, something like that. Okay, and now what I'll do is select my text. And what's cool about this is I can now use this sort of rotate freeform. So it now lets me move this object around in 3D space. And you can see we get some really interesting looking angles here by doing this, right? So I can kind of change it to a top view, maybe like an exaggerated kind of perspective like that. We can kind of move it on the other side and see how that looks. And that's looking pretty awesome. So with just a couple of clicks here, we've created some really cool looking custom typography, and we can change and tweak the colors, the materials, the lighting, as well as the perspective here. Right, so some pretty cool stuff considering this is all, built into Adobe Illustrator now. And again, if you want to, you can always go back into your 3D materials, right? Maybe play around with the roughness a little bit more if you want it to be like very sort of soft looking. But if you want it to be more reflective, almost like a balloon, then I think keeping the roughness a little bit lower is probably the way to go. With a little bit of that metallic in there, creates a pretty nice looking effect. All right, so now I'm just kind of playing around with colors, but you kind of get the idea. It's a lot of fun to play around with this and experiment, especially when you're using, a custom hand-drawn kind of font. So what we did was, started with a hand-drawn sketch that we vectorized and then turned into a fun-looking 3D piece of text. So play around with this. I encourage you to try this out for yourselves. There's some really cool features here that you can have some fun with, especially when it comes to the free transform and the rotate freeform, I should say, inside of Illustrator. So it really gives you a lot of creative freedom and makes some cool looking results. So I hope that you enjoyed this tutorial today. If so, please go ahead and smash that like button. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and turn on that notification bell so you never miss an update. My name is Eric Vasquez, here for Teach Me to Design. Thanks again for joining me today, and we'll see you next time.